John Hintz, Winterset, Iowa. Birth date, November 26th, 1969. My dad was a school administrator, so we moved about every 3 years. So my homes were Forest City, Iowa, Spencer, Iowa, Ballard, Newton, Des Moines. We just kind of moved all over. I went to Wartburg College. It's in Waverly, Iowa. I was an artist as a kid, went to school for it, and got a job doing that right outside of college, and just knew immediately that I was missing out on something. I was an athlete, played some sports in college, and just the military kind of was calling my name, I guess. I graduated from college, and I just happened to be turning on the Discovery Channel one night, and they had a special on the 82nd Airborne Division. I saw a bunch of guys jumping out of planes and doing PT, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do after college, so I walked into a recruiter's office here in Des Moines the next day and said, I want to jump out of planes. That's exactly what I said. I joined in 1993 in January. They immediately wanted to put me as an officer because I was a college graduate, and I did not want to go in as an officer, so the recruiters thought I was kind of crazy, turning down a lot of extra money, but I went in as a specialist because I was a college graduate. After airborne school, they sent me to Fort Bragg, and that was a rude awakening. 82nd, you'd get up every day, you get up early, clean your room. At that time, we polished our boots, we ironed put static, we put the starch on our BDUs. So you'd make sure everything was straight the night before, you'd make sure everything was clean, because the squad leader would come in and he would check to make sure everything was 4 inches from the wall. He'd wipe the fingertops, he was from that very, the honor guard, they check everything.
Did he have on?
Yes, he did. He wore the white gloves. I didn't like him much. I didn't want to clean my room every night, but I did. But we'd go run every day. If they said you're not running today, you're still running 2 or 3 miles. And if you're running, then you're running 5 to 10. I was at Fort Bragg for 4 years. While I was there, I was in the reconnaissance unit. I tried out for that, got in the reconnaissance unit, went to sniper school, so did those things, but then got out of the Army. I had served my 4 years. I went in, I loved it. They paid off all my college loans. That was great. And at the time, there was no conflict, no anything. So I got out in 97, I think it was late 97, and then was back here, opened a business, stayed here for about 2 or 3 years. 9/11 happened, went in a month later. So went right back in. It was 4 days before I was getting married. So it was really interesting because I was standing in a living room watching TV, and they cut to a special report. And I'm not kidding you, I think I was trying on my tuxedo that day and everything at the house. And we, myself and my fiance at the time watched everything unfold right there on the television. And then we almost couldn't get married because they put a hold on like federal buildings, state buildings, all these things, and we hadn't picked up our marriage certificate. So it was a struggle to get everything by the 15th and actually get married. It was an extreme case, but immediately I turned to her and I said, we're going to the military, I'm going back in. Like I knew it immediately. Like I felt like something was gonna happen. You don't know what, but I felt like something was gonna happen and I wanted to be part of it. So back to active duty, I went straight back to the 82nd Airborne. I went straight to see the recruiter and said, I want to go right back to the 82nd. And they were like, we'll take you. The crazy thing is I'm at Fort Bragg and I'm preparing to go to combat. And it came down that the military was out of, for officers, they want to have a certain number that are West Pointers, a certain number that are ROTC, and a certain number that are prior service. And it was out of balance a little bit. They needed more prior service guys. So they called me into an office one day and they said, you're a college graduate and you're doing really well here. We're going to have you submit an OCS packet, an Officer Candidate School packet. And I was like, no, I'm not doing this. And he said, well, yeah, you are. And so they essentially forced me to submit a packet. And all I'm thinking about is going to war. And they had me submit this packet. I went to the board, thought I was going to bomb it on purpose, and ended up maxing the score at the board. And so I went to OCS. You learn the importance of just moving from one spot to another. I'd never thought about that, never. At the 82nd, they'd transport you out to the runway. Okay, so that's how you get there. Logistics, food. I think that once you intertwine with everyone and you hear their experiences, you start to learn, wow, there's a lot of things that go on that as an infantry guy you just don't pay attention to. After that, they sent me actually to the 4th Infantry Division at Fort Carson, Colorado. You don't have a lot of choices, so you basically get selected. And I remember they actually selected me first to go to Fort Wainwright, Alaska. That was supposed to be my first post. And I called a lady named Miss Brown, called her at the Infantry Division almost every day trying to get a new post. And she was like, no, you're going there, no. And I remember one day I'd called her, and I'd called her probably 2 months straight, and she finally just said, call me tomorrow, I'll have another opportunity for you, you either take it or leave it. And so I called her the next day, and she said, I have NTC, National Training Center. I didn't want to go to Fort Irwin, California. She said, I have JRTC. I did not want to go to Fort Polk, Louisiana, so I was just shaking my head, and she said, and I have Fort Carson. And I was like, done, I'll take it. Fort Carson, Colorado, yeah, I'll go. And so that was it. I was an infantry lieutenant. I went in there, and I basically was preparing to go to Iraq. So that was it. I went in there and I took over a platoon that had gotten back. So I took them over like 2 weeks after they got back.
From Iraq?
Yes. So super challenging because you've got a bunch of guys that just came back from combat, and here you are a second lieutenant and they could care less about you. The difference was I was a prior service guy, so they had a lot more respect for me. I gave them the respect they deserved for serving our country. I was only there for about 5 months. You know, as an officer, they evaluate you and kind of rank you. Immediately, I was the #1 guy, so they shifted me down the street to take over a reconnaissance platoon. I was an infantry scout at Fort Bragg, so that I was a leg. I walked. These guys were 19 Delta. I think that's what it's called, 19 Bravo, 19 Delta. I think it's 19 Delta. They're Cav scouts, so they don't walk. They have vehicles. They have Humvees. They have Bradleys. And so when I thought I was taking over a reconnaissance platoon, I thought it was going to be a bunch of legs like me, and it was not. So I immediately bumped heads with all of them. You know, I remember taking over the platoon, and they weren't in shape like I was. They didn't run like I did. They didn't do PT like I did. So I remember the very first day, I walked up front, I saluted the platoon sergeant, and I looked at the platoon and I said, you're all fat, and I'm going to fix it. And I walked away. And so they really liked me. But I mean, I learned to respect them. They had a tremendous amount of knowledge about their craft. So I learned from them, and they learned some physical things from me. I knew what was important to me. They told me real quick that we were going to a pretty hot area between Baghdad and Bakaba. So I knew that I was going to have a hot deployment. They told me that right up front. The people that were there in country that we were going to relieve had already lost some people. A lot of IED play in the area. So I just tried to build my training to go to Iraq based on what we were going to face. They put me in a place called the Diala Media Center. It was a gigantic broadcast tower. So they beefed up my platoon to extra people, had us not only guard that area because they were broadcasting a pro-America kind of thing, pro-coalition forces kind of thing. So we guarded that, and at the same time we had to run patrols all the time up and down a route called Detroit, which was pretty rough. So we didn't live on a big fob. In other words, my platoon lived by ourselves. 3 cycles, you were either on guard, because we had to guard the facility we were at. That was different than a lot of people. We had patrol and we had sleep or lifting weights, you know, recovery. I mean, that was really it. So we lived out in this little spot in the middle of nowhere, and every day we had kind of divided our platoon into 3 components, and we just rotated. So you knew your days, you knew what days you were going out. And then if there was something, we also had a QRF, a quick reaction force, because we still got hit by a lot of things on that road. And so you'd send a QRF and you'd call for air. So, but yeah, I was at the front at the last second. I remember seeing a wire coming across the road. I should have caught it, didn't, but we caught it the last second, yelled IED, and that was it. Tore the front of the vehicle off. You know, pretty good head injury, neck injury, all that kind of stuff. Knocked me out cold. I was bleeding pretty bad. Don't remember any of it. And I remember that I kind of came to in the back of the seat. They were covering the vehicle, you know, and at first they thought I was dead because I was bleeding pretty bad, but head injuries bleed. Come home and you're on a whole bunch of buses, and they take you to this big ceremony, and you come in there, and all of a sudden I'm standing, you know, at the front of a platoon in a ceremony, and there's my wife and kids. Like, I'm just like, I don't want to be in this. Just release me right now. And I can hear my kids crying and screaming, and it's one of those things that you can't truly grasp. I was home for, I'd say, 3 years, because I actually, you know, had to go through the process of turning over command, doing all the things at Fort Carson, and then I went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, so the 101st. And right before I went there, actually, they sent me to get my master's, and they sent me to Captain's Career Course. So I was in the process of becoming commander. They immediately said to me, you're a hardcore, we're going to send you to a pretty rough spot. And so I immediately, we went to a place called Zarak in Afghanistan, and I knew before I ever got there that it was pretty rough. We were going to be in the mountains, patrolling in the mountains, walking in the mountains, and we were going to engage people in the mountains. We were going to see face-to-face combat, which a lot of people never have, and I knew we were going to, and we did. We got in some huge firefights. We flew into a big place, prepared, and then they flew us by helicopter, air assault, and dropped us in the mountains right by the Pakistan border. And it was a little tiny command outpost, so we were going to live there by ourselves again. Like my first deployment, we didn't live on a fob, we lived out in the middle of nowhere. And that was a main route for, they used to move weapons and equipment through our area. That's why they put us there, to try to stop the Haqqani network and try to stop the Taliban that's in the area. The platoons had a rough time, but they also knew they had to have a rough time because the minute you sat back, they would just close in like a noose. So you had to get out and push and patrol and engage. And we did. The medics are amazing. And they would fly us out of there. We had a day where our front gate was attacked. The two individuals that were in the tower were injured severely, but both of them continued to fight. One of them actually went down into the gateway, and some of the soldiers some of the Taliban that were trying to come through the gate had suicide vests, everything. He was killing them, and then he'd go up and lay on them and continue to guard the gate. He did so until we could get reinforcements there, and the reason they were both injured was a big truck had driven up with explosives and blown the whole front gate open. And then a coordinated attack, lots of gunfire, and these guys tried to come through the gate to blow up people. Both of them were given the Silver Star. So one of them should have got the Medal of Honor. It was just downgraded. And I think the only reason to this day is because he wasn't injured. You know, and these were specialists, 19 years old, who saved, so many lives, countless lives. So, but yeah, I mean, heroic, amazing things performed by, young men, just incredible. The main thing I remember is just the guys, these young guys that we lost, because they don't go away. And probably the most valuable thing I ever learned was if you're in a situation and you're allowing your emotions to get to you, put it on a shelf. I had a commander that said, take the situation, put it on the shelf. You're now looking at it. You're not in it anymore. I'm a tattoo artist. I tattoo, a tremendous amount of veterans, military personnel that have served overseas, that haven't served overseas. I tattoo a tremendous amount of law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, first responders, a lot of who have served. I'm kind of like their therapist. Not only do I give them cool tattoos, but a lot of times they get to tell me their stories. And being I've had similar stories, there's quite a bond. And a lot of times these guys can't talk. I talk a lot to people about PTSD. Troy Peterson started Valor Fit. I leveraged, I helped that guy quite a bit, and I try to help anybody I can just by saying, hey, you're important. The things you're going to do are important, and I've seen them do great things. And then we've done a lot of charity events around here, trying to donate to a lot of different organizations. So I love the fact that people can be proud of what they've done, their service to the country, they're great Americans, and they can display something that is just awesome. So I love the fact that I have a whole bunch of these poppies tattooed on my arm. The poppy itself is supposed to pay homage to the fallen, and the number coincides with the men that I've lost. I've probably tattooed 200-300 flags in this, in this space in the past 3 years. Just patriotism, pride, especially if they've served. A lot of people that have served, have a lot of things from their deployments that they want tattooed on them. A lot of soldiers' crosses, paying respect to somebody they lost. It tells a story without telling a story.